A very good morning to all of you. In my last lecture, I dealt with Mary Wollstonecraft's uh, chapter from her famous work, The Vindication of the Rights of Women. Well, in this lecture, I shall be talking about Victorian criticism. So, I think the screen is visible to all of you. Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Which screen do you see? Is it Victorian criticism only? Okay. Okay, now I shall start. Let's try to understand what is Victorian criticism. You must be knowing that after the Romanticism, it was the Victorian age. Victorian age, is known by the name of Queen Victoria. She ruled over England, and this is the period of industrialization, rapid industrialization, and many other changes were taking place in the Victorian society. So we shall be understanding critical theory in this context. So the Victorian critical theory reflected the ideological upheaval. Ideological means many changes were taking place in the ideologies, means in the thinking process because of the happenings around. Different kinds of changes were taking place in the context of science, technology, industry, and you might be knowing even Charles Darwin had come up with his theory of evolution during the same period. So there was certain kind of upheaval in the society. Many changes were taking place. New advances in empirical sciences. So just now mentioned about Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin came up with his theory of evolution in his book on the origin of species. So that was a revolutionary work. And these advances in empirical sciences and even geology gave rise to questions about the nature of reality. Means they started questioning previous ideas about religion and truth. People became more rational because of these scientific advancements, these new advancements. They started thinking more scientifically. So this increased awareness regarding the science and its presence made people to question religion itself. Okay, so the truth was being questioned once again. Apart from that, as I mentioned earlier, industrialization was taking place on a larger scale, but it brought certain other problems as well. So there was, growing urbanization, which resulted into overcrowding. There was poverty, disease, and in addition to a climate of materialism and mechanization. So all these issues resulted in a kind of cultural feeling of anxiety, a fearful scenario was created. Even in today's conditions as well, we have the pandemic conditions around us. So there is a kind of feeling of anxiety, a feeling of uncertainty. Nobody knows what is going to happen. Okay, so we have been in under this feeling of anxiety for last 1 year. So certain kind of changes, had brought all these problems in the Victorian society. So crowd was the problem. London was overcrowded, or other big cities, industrial cities were getting overcrowded, as it happens in the case of Mumbai, Pune, etc., Delhi, all other big cities, and it brings poverty as well. It brings diseases as well. So all these things were causing problem, and there was a kind of anxiety or feeling of restlessness. So you must have studied a poem by Matthew Arnold in your SYBA, Dover Beach. So Dover Beach expresses this kind of no sense of loss, this feeling of anxiety, wherein he talks about the British Channel, so which connects the French and British shores you might be knowing. So he observes the other side and he comes up with his anxiety. He goes into past and all. I hope you remember the poem. So Matthew Arnold is especially known for such kind of cultural sensibility. So in this context, in this milieu, the proper function of literature and of criticism became a subject of widespread debate. Means when the society was changing, when the problems were arising, there was increased anxiety. So the role of literature and criticism became crucial, and there was a kind of widespread debate over these matters. So the critics of that period, the critics of the day, examined literature in relation to other modes of discourse. So they started examining literature with in relationship to science, religion, art, etc. Okay, and according to Alba H. Warren Jr., the post-romantic critics, means Victorian critics, recognize few common aims of literature. So Victorian critics can be called post-romantic critics because it was a kind of reaction against romanticism. In this context, it becomes important to understand what Terry Eagleton, one of the greatest critics, English critics, what is his view? Let's try to understand. He explains that Victorian society literary critics were conflicted with respect to their role in the culture of the time. So I quote his statement here. Either criticism strives to justify itself at the bar of public opinion, maintaining a general humanistic responsibility for the culture as a whole, the amateurism of which will prove increasingly incapacitating as bourgeois society develops, or it converts itself into a species of technological expertise, thereby establishing its professional legitimacy at the cost of renouncing any wider social relevance. End quote. So what he's trying to focus, he was trying to tell about the role of the critics, Victorian critics. So they had this conflicting situation. So they were conflicted with respect to their role in the culture of the time. So they had to strive. Strive means to try hard to justify itself at the bar of public opinion. Means criticism was looked or was professed as a kind of public opinion. The bar stands for here, you might be knowing, the Bar Association of Lawyers, might be knowing that. I'm not talking about other bars where we get liquor and all. Here we refer to the bar, means the association of lawyers who come up with public opinion by maintaining a general humanistic responsibility. At the same time, means while talking about the role of criticism, they were expected to talk about humanistic responsibility and for the culture as a whole. They were supposed to talk about culture on behalf of culture. And at the same time, there was a kind of amateurism. Amateurism means something which is done for pleasure, not seriously. You might be knowing amateur artist and all, something which is done by pleasure. Means there was not simply a pleasure. The amateurism was of which will prove increasingly incapacitating as bourgeois society develops. So literature or criticism was not simply for the sake of interest, not for the sake of pleasure. That was weakening day by day because of the rise of bourgeois society. Bourgeois is the Marxist term to refer to middle class. So during this century, 19th century, Victorian age, Middle class was rising, because of that, you might know, novel as a form of literature became very famous during this period. There was a reading class. So with this rise of middle class, the role and responsibility of criticism and critics had become very important. So they had this kind of conflicting situation. On the one hand, they had this kind of thinking, and on the other hand, or it converts itself into a species of technological expertise, or it converts itself to the technology, rising technology, thereby establishing its professional legitimacy at the cost of renouncing any vital social relevance, either to take the social side or the technological side. That was the conflicting situation for the Victorian critics, and they were stuck into this particular scenario. That's what Terry Eagleton thinks. One of the important critics of this particular period was Matthew Arnold. Of course, there were poets as well. You might be knowing Robert Browning, then Tennyson. Okay, Alfred Lord Tennyson were the great poets of this period. Apart from that, Matthew Arnold was one more Victorian poet and critic. So we are talking in the context of criticism, therefore I'm referring to Matthew Arnold. When you study literature, you should think of those two great poets. So Matthew Arnold, perhaps the most influential critic of the Victorian era, saw cultural expressions such as art and literature as having an important impact on the overall well-being of society. So he looked at literature in from a cultural point of view. Literature is an expression of culture. Art is an expression of culture. And cultural expressions had their impact on the overall well-being of society, the overall welfare of the society. Art and literature, in his view, had a very specific and significant role in the well-being of society. He felt that great literature conveyed deep and everlasting truths about the human condition. So Matthew Arnold is talking about the role of literature in human society, in culture. Great literature conveyed deep and everlasting truths about the human condition. And these great works, which are combined with detached objective criticism, means apart from literature, criticism, which should be detached, objective, not subjective. Detached means a critic should keep himself away from his personal emotions, should be kept away from, would naturally move culture toward intellectual, moral, and spiritual function or perfection. Now you understand here that Matthew Arnold is trying to underscore the role of literature. It can have a great cultural role. It can make people to develop intellectually, morally, and spiritually. It can bring all perfection on all these levels. So you can understand that he was more in favor of the moral role of literature, the spiritual role of literature. So he attempted to address societal anxieties. I told you what had happened during this period. When Charles Darwin came up with his theory of evolution, the European society, especially the British society, had got shattered. Earlier, it believed in religion. Earlier, it believed that it was God who created man. Earlier it believed in the story being told in Bible. Adam and Eve were created by God, but it was Charles Darwin who shattered this particular belief. He challenged it. He said it wasn't God who created man, man evolved from a monkey. So this theory, the theory of evolution, he came up with in his famous work on the origin of species. So that itself, created a problem because all of a sudden you lose your belief, your what do you call your trust in something. You have been believing that it was God. There is someone who takes care of all of us, and suddenly science tells you that there is no God as such. God is not the creator. And that was a kind of cause for societal anxieties. It was a threat to religion by proposing that people look to poetry for inspiration as a buffer of sorts from bleak reality. So literature was something which inspired people. It was a kind of something which made people to believe in reality. And in this context, the role of literature became important in this condition of societal anxieties. I refer here to Patrick Pariender. Pariender. He says that it was Arnold who bore the burnt up, what we call this propagandizing for literary culture in the Victorian age. Propaganda means you might be knowing. Propaganda means making advertisement. He took the responsibility. It was Arnold who took the responsibility of talking about the importance of literature in human society. It was Arnold who saw literature as embodying the spiritual life of modern society. So it was literature. It was he who thought that literature has this capacity to carry the spiritual life of modern society. And he took the responsibility of giving it a great role, edifying and consoling functions of religion. So he even talked about the role of religion in human life, in culture, in the context wherein science had challenged everything. It was Matthew Arnold who took the responsibility of inspiring people. Now, what T.S. Eliot says about Matthew Arnold, let's try to understand. T.S. Eliot was not a Victorian critic, but he is a modern critic. I'm referring to him here to understand his views about Matthew Arnold. So T.S. Eliot claims that Arnold's work as a critic is weakened by his conjuring trick. Conjuring means magical, something which tries to capture something. He uses a trick, according to T.S. Eliot. Arnold used some conjuring trick, whereby he considered poetry as a substitute for both religion and philosophy. So T.S. Eliot seems to be disagreeing with Arnold in this particular context with reference to the role of poetry or literature. Arnold had attributed the religious and philosophical role to literature, but T.S. Eliot thinks that he is trying to weakening literature by doing so. Literature is not meant for giving religious lessons or philosophical lessons. So T.S. Eliot takes the position that Arnold's reputation as a literary critic is overblown and unsubstantial, a viewpoint that even Lionel Trilling challenges in his essay, one more critic, The Spirit of Criticism. This viewpoint was challenged by Lionel Trilling. You are going to study in the next semester. So T.S. Eliot thought that it was a kind of a challenge to Arnold's reputation as a poet, as a literary critic. Because of course, it was challenged again by Trilling itself in his essay, The Spirit of Criticism. So later in the century, in the same 19th century, in contrast to previous concerns with science, culture, and religion, there came the development of the aesthetic movement. Earlier, Arnold had thought of in the context of culture and religion to something. He tried to understand the literature in relation to science. There came a movement which was named as aesthetic movement. You are familiar with the term aesthetic movement, and those who are going to create Quizlet on it, they should include the term. It starts with A, aesthetic movement. You might be knowing the moment related to the beauty and of art. So this movement underscored the functional literature just for the sake of art. They underscore art for art's sake. Art for art's sake means art for the sake of showing aesthetic beauty of art, not for some other function. Walter Pater also talks about Victorian criticism. The moment, actually, aesthetic movement is related to Walter Pater, one more critic. So Walter Pater's preface to studies in the history of the Renaissance, which was published in the year 1873, was written after a trip to Italy where Pater became quite impressed with the vitality and sensuality of Italian culture. So he is the leading figure in the aesthetic movement for art's sake. The aesthetic movement which emphasized on art for art's sake. It was under the Italian influence on him. So the aesthetic movement pivoted on the belief that since the absolutes of religion and morality were rendered relative and mutable, the purpose of life had necessarily changed as well. So what he said, religion and morality are relative. They change from society to society, culture to culture. They are not the same. They are not universals, the principles of religion. And they are mutable, means they are subject to change. Religion and morality do not have uniformity as such. They are relative terms. Whatever is good in India may not be good in America, in Europe. So that is relative. And it is mutable. Means what? Whatever was good in the 16th century may not be good in 20th century or 21st century. Therefore, the purpose had necessarily changed. Literature, the purpose of literature, the purpose of life has changed. So he wrote that since life was so short, it was imperative to seek not the fruit of experience, but experience itself. So they emphasize on the present. They emphasize on the beauty of art. So they thought that Pater and his followers, the people belonging to the aesthetic movement, thought that literature is not something to give moral lessons. It is for the sake of joy, okay, by aesthetic beauty. So the aesthetic critics, according to them, to be truly alive was to be immersed in ecstatic experience. Ecstasy means the ultimate pleasure. Ecstatic means ultimate. What is the Marathi term? Parmocha Ananda. That is the true function of literature, to give ecstatic experience, with free enjoyment being the supreme priority and beauty as central focus, not teaching lessons. Okay, enjoyment, joy, pleasure was given, ecstatic experience was given the central focus, and beauty was important for them. So these aesthetic critics became concerned with seeking and identifying beauty not as an absolute but as a relative, ever changing quality. Again, beauty, the concept of beauty is relative, it is ever changing quality. Whatever is beautiful for an Indian may not be the same with the African person. For example, the color means we think that fair color is the sign of beauty. It may not be the case with African people. So it is a relative quality, and it is changing, ever changing quality. It changes with time. So Albert J. Farmer claims that the aim of the aesthetic critic should be to find not some inadequate universal formula, but the formula which expresses beauty. So that's what I was trying to tell. Their focus was more on beauty and joy. The thing of beauty, joy forever. So that's what they believed in. Okay, so this is how we understand Victorian criticism for understanding the poet, sorry, Victorian critic Matthew Arnold. I hope this will be helpful to understand Matthew Arnold's perspective of looking at literature.